On the night of July 30th, 2026, tens of thousands of people rushed a border fence on the coast of North Africa. By the next morning, Spanish officials were confirming a death toll that kept climbing through the day, first 18, then higher, until it stood at 57. Some drowned trying to swim around a sea breakwater. Others were crushed in the crowd trying to climb over it. Nearly 50,000 people made it across in a matter of hours. This wasn't a war zone. It was Ceuta, a 5-square-mile Spanish city on the coast of Morocco, separated from mainland Spain by 14 miles of open water. To understand why a city most people can't find on a map just triggered a diplomatic rupture inside the European Union, with Italy shutting its borders to Spain and Brussels calling the situation unacceptable. You have to understand what Ceuta and Melilla actually are and why this keeps happening. Look at a map of North Africa and you'll see Morocco stretching along the coast and then two small dots that don't belong. Ceuta and Melilla, Spanish cities on African soil, each surrounded on their landward side not by ocean, but by Morocco itself. Spain has held Ceuta since 1580 and Melilla since 1497. That's not a typo. Spanish rule here predates the founding of the United States by nearly 3 centuries. For context, Melilla has been Spanish for longer than Manhattan has been part of New York. Morocco doesn't see it that way. Rabat considers both cities occupied territory, colonial leftovers that should have been returned when Morocco gained independence from Spain and France in 1956, the same way Spain eventually withdrew from its other African holdings. Spain's position is that these cities are older than the modern Moroccan state itself, and that their status was repeatedly recognized in treaties signed with Moroccan sultans going back to the 1700s. Both governments have held this position, unmoved, for decades, and that unresolved dispute is the backdrop for everything that happens next, because Ceuta and Melilla are the only land borders between Africa and the European Union. They've become one of the most fought-over strips of land on the continent, not fought over with armies, but with fences, night vision cameras, and increasingly, people's bodies. The current border fence dates back to the 1990s, but it was radically reinforced after a wave of mass crossings in 2005. Spain and Morocco responded by doubling the fencing and raising it from 3 meters to 6, then adding tear gas sprinklers, motion sensors, heat detectors, and razor wire in between. It didn't stop the crossings. It just changed their shape. In 2014, nearly 500 migrants scaled the fence in a single coordinated rush. In 2021, more than 10,000 people crossed into Ceuta in the span of days. And that crisis, it later emerged, wasn't a failure of Moroccan border control. It was Morocco choosing not to enforce it, after Spain angered Rabat by allowing the leader of a Western Sahara independence movement to receive hospital treatment on Spanish soil. Migration, in other words, had become a lever Morocco could pull. Then came June 24th, 2022, the deadliest single day in the fence's history. Roughly 2,000 people attempted to storm the Melilla crossing at once. In the crush against the fence, 23 people died. Human rights groups called it one of the worst tragedies at a European border in years. After that, Morocco tightened enforcement dramatically. By 2024, only 113 people managed to cross irregularly into Melilla for the entire year, the lowest number since the 1990s, which is what made July 2026 such a shock, because nothing in the recent trend predicted it. To understand why Morocco's border enforcement seems to switch on and off almost like a valve, you need one more piece of the story: Western Sahara. It's a sparsely populated desert territory south of Morocco, and its sovereignty has been disputed for 50 years. Morocco controls most of it and considers it Moroccan territory. A rival group called the Polisario Front, backed by Algeria, wants it independent. Spain, the former colonial power there, has tried to stay neutral. But neutrality on Western Sahara is nearly impossible for Madrid, because whichever side it leans toward, the other side reacts. That's the mechanism behind the 2021 crisis. It appears to be part of the mechanism behind 2026 as well. Spanish policy moves seen in Rabat as more sympathetic to the Sahrawi independence cause have repeatedly coincided with sudden, dramatic loosening of Moroccan border enforcement at Ceuta and Melilla. Morocco has never officially confirmed it uses migration this way, but the pattern, a diplomatic snub followed almost immediately by a mass border rush, has now repeated itself enough times that it's become a subject of open debate among European officials. So here's what unfolded. Starting the morning of July 30th, thousands of people gathered on the Moroccan side of Ceuta in the town of Bini Ansar. Some clashed with Moroccan police, throwing rocks, setting police vehicles on fire. Then, in a wave, they moved, some swimming around the breakwater at Tarajal Beach, others trying to climb over it directly. Within 24 hours, close to 60,000 people had crossed into Ceuta, a city whose entire population is only about 84,000. Overnight, this tiny Spanish enclave was absorbing a number of arrivals equal to roughly 70% of its own population. The human cost was severe. Spanish authorities eventually confirmed at least 57 deaths, people who drowned in the strait or were crushed in the crowd trying to scale the sea barrier. Simultaneously, smaller groups attempted the same at Melilla, further along the coast. Spain's government moved fast. It deployed army units, diving teams, and maritime service vessels to the enclave and began processing large-scale returns. By Friday afternoon, Spanish officials said more than 48,000 of those who'd crossed had already gone back to Morocco, some voluntarily, overwhelmed by the chaos they'd walked into, others as part of an accelerated repatriation effort Madrid says it's now formalizing into law. As for why this specific moment triggered such a massive rush, investigators point to three overlapping factors: worsening economic conditions in parts of Morocco, misinformation circulating, falsely, that migrants who reached Spanish soil would be allowed to stay, and organized smuggling networks that appear to have coordinated the timing of the crossing to maximize the number of people moving at once, overwhelming any possible response. Section 5. The crisis spreads to Brussels. Normally, a story like this stays a Spain-Morocco story. This one didn't. Within days, Italy's government, led by Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, alongside Deputy Prime Ministers Antonio Tajani and Matteo Salvini, announced it was suspending the Schengen Free Movement Agreement with Spain, closing its air and sea borders to Spanish arrivals. Schengen is the arrangement that lets people move between most EU countries without passport checks, one of the European Union's foundational achievements. Suspending it against a fellow EU member, even temporarily, is an extraordinary step. Italy's reasoning was that Spain's inability to contain the Ceuta crossings posed a risk of secondary migration into Italy. Critics noted the timing lines up with domestic political pressure. Meloni's coalition has been losing ground to an even further right party campaigning hard on immigration. Spain didn't take it quietly. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez responded publicly, writing that solidarity and empathy are optional. Respect for European treaties and the facts is not. Spain's foreign minister summoned Italy's ambassador in Madrid to explain the move. In Brussels, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen called the situation in Ceuta unacceptable and appointed 2 commissioners to directly oversee the EU's response, a sign that this is no longer being treated as a bilateral border dispute, but as a test of the European Union's ability to manage migration and internal solidarity at the same time. As of now, the numbers are still being finalized. The death toll may still rise. Thousands of the people who crossed into Ceuta remain there despite government warnings, even as tens of thousands have already been sent back across the border. But the deeper issue hasn't moved an inch. Ceuta and Melilla still sit exactly where they've sat for centuries, Spanish cities on African soil, claimed by a neighbor that has never accepted their status, and now sitting at the only place where Africa and the European Union touch by land. Every time tensions rise over Western Sahara or over any other point of friction between Madrid and Rabat, this border becomes the pressure valve, and the people who pay for it first are almost never the diplomats. They're the ones in the water. Spain has reinforced this fence for 30 years. It hasn't resolved a single one of the underlying disputes that keep reopening it. And until Madrid and Rabat find an actual answer to the Western Sahara question, and the EU decides whether it will treat this as one member state's problem or all of theirs, Ceuta and Melilla will likely keep doing what they've done since 2005, absorbing the shock first and forcing everyone else to react after.